So good morning, everybody. This is our fourth week of being on the struggle bus. Who's ready to get off? I think I am. So I have a confession to make. I am a Facebook user. Mainly because I want to be in the know. I guess another way you could say that is I'm nosy. But the first step in recovery is admitting it, right? Well, after just about 2 minutes of scrolling through Facebook, for those of you who use it, or other social media, I don't know about you, but I start seeing stories of people's suffering a lot of times. Or I follow a news channel locally, and every story I click on seems to be about a struggle or something terrible that has happened in our world, and my anxiety seems like it just starts to go up. One thing I know for sure, the entire world is on the struggle bus. The struggle bus is a big bus. It seems that human suffering and tragedy and turmoil are everywhere we turn and everywhere we look. And a lot of the headlines, I get a news site on my email, it seems like every title has the word, or headline has horror or tragedy or deadly somewhere in the title. And maybe it's just my age, but it seems like more and more people I know are having health issues or get some sort of devastating diagnosis. And I think to myself, am I next? Like, when is the boom going to fall on me? I see people that are struggling financially. I don't know if you guys are. Or people who are reeling from some sort of trauma. Relationships are in turmoil. And there is a lot of political unrest. And that's happening all over America just this week. A lot of times, even, I feel like we're insulated from things that are happening around the globe. But there just seems to be a lot of human suffering that's happening. And it's easy to get overwhelmed. Have any of you guys felt kind of overwhelmed in the past couple of weeks of everything that's been going on in the news? It's easy to feel helplessness or hopelessness because it feels like we can't really do anything about it, about the suffering that we see all around us. Some of those things I mentioned may even be happening to us or to you right now, or somebody that you love is going through some really hard times. Yet I feel like in those moments, for us to survive the storm, we have to lean heavily on the truth of Jesus and what he says and what he stands for. Verses like this, you guys. Let not your hearts be troubled, Jesus said. Believe in God, believe also in me. And then a few chapters later, he says these words, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. Listen to this. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. That's the truth of Jesus. If we think back, though, humans have really been struggling, I think, with heartache and tragedy and suffering since the Garden of Eden, when a little tricky snake, I know most of you don't like snakes, I don't either, whispered in their ear and basically had them question if God was really good. And in the same way, we've been walking down a path with Job the last few weeks. And he, as we studied his story, starts questioning God's goodness and wondering, why has this tragedy suddenly engulfed his life? When we first encounter Job, he seems to live like the picture-perfect life, right? He's described as a righteous man. which means he was in right standing with God, not sinless, but right standing with God, and he tried to live a pure life before God. And as the story goes, he was doing pretty good, right? He had wealth and wisdom. He helped other people in need. He wasn't this father who had his head stuck in the sand about his children. He even offered sacrifices for their benefit in case they sinned. So he was a good guy, okay? And I found this intriguing in Job, but God actually even bragged on Job, okay? Which reminds me and helps me know that God has the heart of the Father, because we like to brag on our kids, right? And so there was this conversation between God and Satan, which I also found really intriguing. Satan basically had to check in with God, and that's when God bragged on Job. Have you noticed my servant Job? But it makes sense that Satan would check in with God because Satan is under God's authority. And that's something we need to remember when our anxiety is kind of high, is that he was under God's authority then, and guess what? Satan is under God's authority now. And it's something we tend to forget. Maybe you see people kind of like Job, especially if you're on social media. They seem to live kind of this charmed life, right? And it makes you kind of feel less than, like, what's wrong with me? What's happening to me? Job, I said, was healthy, wealthy, and wise, and his family got along. It says that his kids got together and ate together, which is pretty cool, and they didn't seem to argue that much. Again, the Bible says Job was a generous man. He helped people. Do you ever look at people and think, how do they have it so good? Like, they seem like they have everything together. But let me tell you something. Everybody has struggles, okay? And if they're not struggling now, guess what? Give them a little bit of time and they will be struggling. And it's easy, I think, to want to compare our lives to other people's lives. Have you ever fallen into that trap where you look at somebody's life and you're like, okay, they seem to have it all together. Everything seems to be going really well for them. They've been really blessed. But when you compare your life with somebody else's life, it's really a no-win situation, right? Either you're going to think, I have it all together because look at what their life is all about. Or you're going to be jealous, right, of what they have and what the blessings that they have in their life. Or you're going to wonder why your life is so bad compared to theirs. Or you might even downplay your own struggles, thinking, well, a lot of people have it a lot worse than I do, and so my struggles don't even matter. Struggle is struggle, regardless of how big or small it is. And we really need to not fall into the trap of comparing our lives to others. I had a good friend named Mandy, and she always says this: when you compare and compete, you live in defeat. I liked it. It was catchy. When you compare and compete, when you compare your life to somebody else's, and you're always trying to be in competition with somebody else, you're always going to live in defeat. Because struggles are part of the human condition. It may seem as if God doesn't care about our struggles, but He does, you guys, and He's walking alongside you in your struggles. And He's walking alongside me in my struggles. In fact, the whole reason that Jesus died for us is because God cares so deeply and loves us so much. Chad talked about it last week in his message, that God has a plan. We also even see how much Jesus cares about our struggles in His very first sermon. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. You may be familiar with it. So when He got to a certain age and started His ministry, one of the first times He spoke publicly, it was called the Sermon on the Mount. And listen to His very first words. It's not on the screen, but I just want to read it to you. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they'll inherit the earth. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. The first words in Jesus' public ministry were about our souls and our spirits and how much he cared for people who were grieving and people who struggled in their soul. Speaking of struggle, I just have to be honest with you guys. When I was reading through the book of Job, I've been struggling with this story. I can't really comprehend why God, in his goodness, would bring this travesty on one of his favorite kids. I've been struggling. It's a tough story to understand why God allowed something like that to happen to a good guy. But then as I've been thinking this week just about it, this thing came into my head, and I just want to share it with you. So most of you know my husband Frankie and I have 3 boys, and I'm going to try not to embarrass them. Caleb is 20, Joel is 18, almost 19, and Addison is 15. We're really proud of our boys, and we love them very much. And they're good boys. If you know them, they're good boys. And I'm really thankful that the Lord gave them to us to raise for this season. Well, if I'm being honest as a mom, when I pray for my boys, I often pray things like this: God, please keep them safe on the highway. Lord, please help them be full of joy. Help them to have success in their schooling. Help them to have success in their relationships. Help them to make wise, godly choices. So that's what I find myself doing, which is natural, of course. But then there's a part of me that gets concerned because they have lived such a blessed life, such a good life. I wonder if their roots are really deep enough when struggle comes. Because a lot of times when we don't have that just intense tragedy or suffering or struggle, sometimes our hearts struggle to be thankful. So I find myself wondering, do they know God in their hearts? Or did they just kind of know of him because of the things that they've heard and we've taught them? You guys might think, well, lady, you need to be thankful that your kids are whole and healthy and good kids. And I do. But to know what's right in your head or to know what's good is not enough. To know what to believe is not what pleases God. Or having good behavior, that's not what shows you who God really is. In fact, truth that is untested by life's difficult circumstances often becomes stagnant. It becomes easy to take God's blessings for granted. Just as drought, in the month of June, we had like 0.2 or 0.02 inches of rain. And then in July, we've had feels like 20 inches of rain. But in the month of June, what did the tree roots have to do? In drought, they had to go deeper, right? And that is what happens with us when we struggle, when we have challenging things happen to us. Our roots go deeper. And our suffering drives us beyond this superficial acceptance of truth. I'm going to be honest with you guys. As a follower of Christ, when I look back over my life, the times when I've been closest to God have been during the times of greatest struggle. Times when I felt the most alone, times when I failed, times when I felt like nobody understood anything I was going through, times when I've seriously pondered what it would be like to take my own life. And I was there. And I was running from God, and I did not want to talk to God. But guess what? He was there. And it seems like the more I ran, he was patient, but he pressed in. He pressed into me. And I think this is an example of the blessings that come from struggles. And you think blessings that come from struggles? Yeah, blessings can come from struggles. Think about a plant. Do any of you guys like to grow plants in the room? Raise your hand. Do you like to oh, it's a lot of you. Okay, I don't really join you there. I like artificial plants. But anyway, have you thought about a plant and that seed? Plants grow, at least at first, in the darkness. If there wasn't for that seed being in the darkness, it wouldn't grow. It wouldn't germinate. But then what happens? That plant is seeking sunlight, right? It's desperately seeking sunlight because it needs sunlight to grow and survive. I feel like our hearts are similar to that. We can grow in the darkness, but we eventually have to reach up to the sun, S-O-N, to shine in our lives, which causes us to flourish. So one of the blessings in struggle is spiritual growth. Learning to depend on God more than we depend on ourselves. And I'm an independent person, all right? I like to depend on myself. Because if I let myself down, that's not so bad. If you let me down, well, not good for you. So I like to depend on myself, but that's not spiritual growth. Spiritual growth is learning to depend on God. I think this is why, you guys, God allowed Job to struggle, and in turn, why he allows us to struggle. We limit God with these finite minds. God's will is perfect, but we always don't understand what he's doing. Sometimes things, you guys, just don't make sense. We often assume what? That good people are supposed to prosper and bad people are supposed to get what's coming to them, right? But that's not often the case. We just have to look around and see that. And on the reverse side, pain in our lives isn't always punishment. Pain makes us more sensitive to God, and it can make us more sensitive to others. Brokenness can actually make us stronger. Has anybody in here broken a bone? Raise your hand. Have you ever broken a bone? Okay, yeah, I see those hands. Okay. So I have broken a bone. Just a story. We were headed as a family to a viewing. A friend of ours had passed away. So we were headed to a viewing at one of the funeral homes on Noose Boulevard, right down there near the hospital. And we weren't sure we could use the restroom. And my oldest son, Caleb, was about 3 years old. So we stopped to use the restroom in the McDonald's right across from the hospital. If you guys live here, you know where I'm talking about, right? It's still there, actually. So when we finished, Caleb, who is always one step ahead of me in life, even now, he headed out of the bathroom several steps ahead of me and headed towards the closest door. Now, I don't know if it's still like this because I haven't been inside that restaurant in a while, but one of the doors led right out into the drive-thru. Like, you went out that door and there was the drive-thru. And I could see out the window as he was running towards that door that a car had left the drive-thru and was slowly making its way past that door. So Caleb hits the door and starts heading out there. Well, as a mom, I'm freaking out, of course. And so I lunge to grab him. And as I do, I have on these fancy little high heels, and my heel or my ankle twists like this, and a bone in my foot snaps. All right, I'm sure you have a broken bone story. But anyway, so I had to, for the next 6 weeks, hobble around on a very painful broken foot with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old where they say, stay off your foot. Like, make sure you prop your foot up. Yeah, right, with kids like that. But guess what? I was on the struggle bus then. Have you ever realized that a broken bone, after it's broken, actually grows stronger? Did you guys know that? When you break a bone in that part that is broken, it actually gets stronger than it ever was before. And I think this is another blessing that comes from struggle. Struggle makes us stronger. We may not feel that in the moment. In the moment, it is painful, but it makes us stronger. When we share our struggle with God, guess what? Our faith gets stronger. When we struggle and we share that with other people, guess what? Our relationships get stronger when we share our struggles with somebody else. And so these are also some of the blessings that come. But you guys, it's hard to see the blessings in the struggles. You know why? Because just like Job, we're focused on the why. Why is this happening to me? Why is this hard thing happening to me right now? It's human nature because we want to be informed, and it brings this sense of security when we can figure out why so we don't have to trust God. Job allowed his desire to figure out why these bad things were happening to him to consume his thoughts. And this, in turn, made him question God's goodness. Job couldn't understand why he was suffering. And his friends tried to help him figure it out, but they were wrong. One thing that I realized from reading this story is that God doesn't eliminate hardship even from people who are doing the right thing. And good behavior doesn't always get rewarded by prosperity. We'd like to think it does, but it doesn't. Now, sometimes we struggle with consequences because of the things we do, right? Sometimes we do some stupid stuff. Yesterday, I did a couple of kind of dumb things, and I suffered the consequences, and I was really grumpy, and I was struggling. Okay? And then sometimes Satan brings these struggles to us, just like Job. And sometimes we have no idea where the struggles are coming from. In those times, though, you guys, are we willing to trust God in spite of the unanswered questions? Are we willing to trust Him? I struggle with trust. Remember where I said I like to be in the know? That's why I went on social media. Well, the desire to be in the know carries over into suffering as well. My default when something is going wrong in my life is, okay, what am I doing wrong? Let me think about what I've done. I'm obviously getting punished for the things I've done. Or when I see other people struggling, I think, they must not be living right. Look what happened to them. I have to have an answer for everything. But what I've come to realize, I think, as I've gotten older is this. Knowing God is better than knowing answers. Knowing God is better than knowing answers. When we don't understand why we suffer, it actually helps us grow, if you can believe it. And this is the blessing that comes from the struggles. But sometimes my faith falters. I want to throw in the towel. Have you ever been there? I just want to get out of the struggle, like, God, get me out of this as quick as you can. Nothing seems to be going our way sometimes, and we just want to give up. We want to give up. And in those moments, it almost feels like God is really far away. It feels like, God, where are you? I don't know if you've ever been there in your life, but God, where are you in this? I thought it was interesting that it seemed like Job was afraid that God had actually abandoned him. And yet he kept pleading with God for mercy, but I think he felt like, God, where are you? And that fear of abandonment is real. Even Jesus, I feel like one of the things that he was afraid of, the thing that broke Jesus' heart the most was when he was on the cross and God had to turn his back literally because of the sin and the shame that he carried for us. And so being abandoned is a really tough thing. And sometimes maybe we feel like God has abandoned us, but he hasn't. I want to tell you guys, God has not abandoned you. Other people might have abandoned you, but God has not abandoned you. And when you go through suffering, please remember God is there. The psalmist says it in chapter 139. It says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast." You guys, God deeply cares about our suffering and our struggles because he cares deeply about every intimate detail of our lives. As I look back on my times of greatest struggle, as a child who carried the weight of somebody who had an alcohol abuse issue, as a teenager who ran away from home, as a middle-aged mom who buckled under job pressure and just wanted out, even if it meant losing everything. When I was suffering the most, as I look back on those times, God was the closest to me. Even when I felt alone, I wasn't. In his grief, Job wanted to give in. He wanted to be freed from his discomfort, even die if that's what it took. But God didn't grant Job's request. God had a greater plan for Job. Our tendency, like Job, is to want to get out of that struggle when the going gets rough. To trust God in the good times, well, that's commendable. But to trust him in the difficult times, that's where the real blessing happens. So I was listening to the book of Job this past week in my car because I have to drive sometimes to Carteret County for my work. I don't know if you guys know this. You've probably used this, but the Bible app that you can download on your phone, it actually has, it'll read the scripture to you. And it's a really awesome thing. So I was listening to Job out loud again, and chapter after chapter after chapter, there was just all this yapping. Like Job was yapping, and his friends were yapping, and one would yap and the other would yap. And chapter after chapter, they were just chattering. And I found myself getting really aggravated. But actually, I think when we have problems and when we're suffering, what do? We yap, right? We yap about it and we want to tell everybody and we just can't seem to get out of it. I call it being in the mully grubs. We just yap. But then in chapter 38, everything becomes silent because God speaks to Job. And listen to what he says. Then the Lord answered Job out of the storm. He said, "Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." That feels harsh, but I think God had had enough of the chattering. Whew. Job had been asking question after question after question. And I saw myself in that, always asking all these questions. And guess what? God chose not to answer Job. Job's questions were not getting to the heart of what God wanted Job to see And that's why he didn't answer. And then, really curiously, God flips the script and starts asking Job questions about the natural world. He starts talking about what the Bible thinks is like elephants. And he actually even starts talking about crocodiles. You guys don't believe me, but go read it. It's actually in there. He's telling Job, do you understand these animals? Do you understand my creation? And of course, Job, we don't understand all the intricacies of creation. And so then God says, all right, if you don't understand these things, then how are you really going to have all the answers and want all the answers for my mind and my heart for you, Job? During Job's struggles, he longed for the opportunity to speak to God. And then when he gets the opportunity, what does he do? He says nothing, which is probably smart on his part. But what Job learned is that God's actions don't depend on ours. God will do what he knows is best, regardless of whether we think it's fair or not. I grew up with a brother who always talked about what was fair. That's not fair, he'd say. That's not fair. She gets this and I don't get it, and that's not fair. Okay, God doesn't operate completely on fairness, and that's a good thing. And when God did appear, though, thankfully he appeared to Job because he cared. Job experienced what I think is a crossroads in his faith. He had two choices, okay? He could curse God and give up, or as his wife said, curse God and die. Or he could trust God, draw strength from God to continue moving forward. In his grief, Job struggled. He wanted to give in, to be freed from all his discomfort. But God didn't want that for Job. God had a greater plan for Job, just like I said. Our tendency is to want to give up and to get out of the struggle as quickly as we can. But Job ultimately chose trust. But he struggled. He struggled to understand. Are you at a crossroads? Have your misconceptions about God been blown out of the water, like God will make you rich? Or if you just trust God enough, he won't cause you to struggle or be in pain? Or God will protect your loved ones no matter what? These things were never promised. Like Job, are we demanding answers when things don't go our way, like when we lose a job, or when somebody close to us is ill or passes away, or things don't go right, or the plan that we had gets sent in another direction? Do we demand answers, or do we trust? I'm guilty of that. I want to demand the answers. And even if we're suffering, if we suffer the right way, doesn't mean that God will always pull us out of those sufferings. It's not cause and effect. Our brains, especially in America, it's if this, then that. Okay? That's a Western way of thinking. That's not how God operates, okay? It's not cause and effect. Because if it was, every time I went speeding down the road, I would get a ticket. And I'm really glad that it doesn't always work like that. I'm thankful for God's mercy. I want to read you guys, as we are closing up, how God responds to Job in the last chapter of the book. And I want you to really hone in, especially near the end of this scripture. It says, "Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my counsel without knowledge? Job says this, surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. I will question you, and you shall answer me." And this is what I want you guys to hone in on. Job said this, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Job was a changed man. Before his struggles, he had heard of the goodness of God. But once he struggled for himself, what does it say? When everything had been stripped away, he was finally able to see God, see the Lord for himself, and experience his goodness. It's one thing to hear about God from other people. It's another thing to see God for yourself. And I think as a parent, that's my heart for my kids, that they wouldn't just hear about God, but they would see God for themselves. And that's the heart of God too, that we would see him. And this is the ultimate blessing that comes from struggle, that we actually, if we will look, we will see him in the struggle. We just cannot give up, and we cannot throw in the towel and walk away. We're going to sing a song together at the end, so the praise team can come forward. But I wanted to just tell you this other story about seeing God and his faithfulness and never giving up. So many years ago, I had taken Caleb, who I said was 20. He was around 2 years old at the time, to the Kidville Park on Pine Tree Drive. I don't know if you've ever ridden by there if you're in this area, but it's the one with all the wooden structures. Have you guys ever been there? It's near West New Rec on Pine Tree Drive. And it was a very hot day, and I was following Caleb all up through those steps, and Joel, who's now 18, was in my belly. Big old belly, and yet I was crawling up through those things, okay? And I sat down for a few minutes just to rest on this bench. I remember exactly where I was sitting. And after I sat down for a minute, this little redheaded girl with curly hair, I had not seen her before that day, she ran up to me, and she got right in my face. And I think I moved back just a little bit. But this is what she said to me. I will never forget it. She said, "Lady, never give up." And then she said, "Did you hear me?" I said, "Never give up. Never give up." And she was like right here. And then she ran away, and I never saw her again. I kept looking for her, and I didn't see her. And as I look back on that, I just wonder if a little red-headed angel came up to me and said, "Never give up. Never give up." And I think that's what God is telling us today, is that we don't ever need to give up. That's what he's telling you today. Never give up. No matter what is going on, no matter the struggle, never give up. Why? Because God is not done yet. He is not finished with you. He's not finished with me. And so we cannot give up. We get stronger in the struggle, you guys. We get stronger in the struggle. And so as we're just closing with this song, the next time you face brokenness or trials or loneliness or brokenheartedness, or even if you're experiencing those things right now, see them as opportunities to turn to God for strength. You'll find a God who not only desires to show you love, but he also shows you compassion. You'll find a waymaker. You'll find, if you look for him, a miracle worker. You'll find a promise keeper, a light in the darkness. That's who God is. So as we sing this song, make it your declaration as you determine to never give